Humanianity, a new religious call. Humanianity, religion for us all. Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can be.
Hi, I'm Bill Van Fleet, and this is Humanianity Conversation number 100, recorded on January 27th, 2021. It is the sixth recorded conversation with David Whalen, an advocate for objectivism. Much of our discussion at the beginning had to do with the concept of natural rights. We also looked at some of the differences in our way of conceptualizing the development of ethics during our lives. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Bill. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Well, let's see. Oh, by the way, I have not yet published our last one. I've been so busy on another project. I plan to get that done probably tomorrow. I'm behind two. Yours is one. Uh, so, um, uh, well, have you been having any thoughts about what will be good for us to discuss?
I think at the end of the last one, we talked about maybe discussing whether humans have natural rights that that in turn would turn into individual rights that should be protected by society.
Uh-huh.
So I thought maybe that'd be a good topic to talk about.
Okay. So I always would want to start with understanding what the key word means.
Okay.
The right. Now, uh, I am familiar with the term, of course, and my understanding is that um, it is a term that has always referred to what you were specifically allowed to do if you were a member of the organization. In other words, rights of citizenship.
Hmm.
And then, as we began to become more global and to uh, try to move away uh, from our tribalism, we started saying, well, maybe our organization should be us humans, our species. And so, therefore, that would mean that humans are given certain rights, but given by whom or how does that occur? And I know that of course, um, many would say that, well, that is a permission, a set of permissions that are granted by the all powerful, i.e., God, or whatever would be all powerful. But then others would say that because it is not immediately evident by any means that there is such an entity as an all powerful God, and that it's very difficult to know if there is what's in the mind of that God, um, even referring to presumably holy literature, that would give the answers, but that literature contains contradictions and ambiguities. So some would say, well, there's um, certain facts about the universe that make it that um, uh, make it a fact like a natural law that would say that humans have certain rights. But then that would be very much contested, and I would not know how that would be figured out. So, anyway, those are my immediate reactions. So, what are your thoughts about how that idea is supported, natural rights? And are you an advocate, or do you believe that there is such a thing as um, human rights um, that occurs in the natural universe?
Yeah, I believe, from what I've learned and understand, um, that man has natural rights just from nature, his creation. And this doesn't have to do with a God creating man. It's just when man came into being, the Homo sapiens, he was free. He was free to choose, to will, to do things, to find food, to comfort himself, um, without restrictions. No one was over him, and he wasn't over anyone if he's by himself at the beginning. And so, um, I I I do hold, when it comes to this, I hold to more of the empiricist understanding of natural rights, uh, and that is based upon how man comes into being, and that right there presents his natural rights. And since these are natural, um, like Aristotle would say, that because man was made free, then slavery is a violation of nature. Um, so for me, that's kind of I like that, and I think there's a lot of truth to that through observation, empirical evidence. Um, so it would be opposite of getting rights based upon a citizenship in a society, um, or getting granted rights by a god or a divine being. Um, Rather, it's something natural that man has when he comes into the world. So, you could look at uh, like man's mind, his thinking, his understanding. Um, these things are part of you that you have freely. That these are yours, and the empiricists would say, because of that fact, that they belong to you, and no one has the right to violate those. So in return, then you have no right to violate another's
Yeah.
rights.
Okay, well, we need to back up because I ran into trouble almost right away in what you were saying. Um, uh, you said when man was created uh, in the natural world, not necessarily by a god, but when man was created.
Yeah, how he came to be, the Homo sapien race
Uh,
species, which
okay.
I'm not a paleontologist, so I haven't really studied that, so I don't know how it
Yeah.
came about exactly, all of
Well,
that.
I am not a paleontologist either, and I'm not highly, knowledgeable about that sort of thing. But my understanding is that take a given species, it tends to wander some and gets into different environments, and different environments tend to favor some characteristics of the species and not others, and that differs depending upon where they go and so forth. And so there tends to be as the species get further apart, there tends to be a growing difference and so on. So um, we are hominids, as classified as hominids, and that consists also of chimpanzees and bonobos and uh, gorillas and orangutans. I think I'm right about that, and or the great apes. But at any rate, you're saying that initially man was free. Now, uh, here is where I can't follow you uh, if I understand what free means, because my understanding is we hominids are one among many groups of social animals. And social animals live in social groups. And what that entails is um, that there are expectations of the group called culture, and that starting very early in life, uh, the small child begins to learn, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. Um, and some of those things might be on the order of, no, you can't hit your brother. But we know that cultures get pretty specific about what they reward and so forth, and that some parents are going to reward certain things and punish other things, or use negative reinforcement for other things, and that differs from family to family. But the main point is that the last thing in the world that I could say about a small child is that that child was free to do whatever it wanted. It runs into the problem that there is a culture surrounding the child, a set of expectations on the part of others that lead to the positive and negative reinforcement. And that um, that positive and negative reinforcement continues throughout the human's life. There are some things that you just don't do. And in fact, there are some things that you just don't do, which a little bit later or in a different culture, you're really supposed to do. Uh, so it's an arbitrary set of expectations. So now within the culture, um, there would be the issue of, let's say, a person saying, well, I want to do such and such. Well, there's the possibility that the somebody else in the culture, maybe very significant, would say, well, no, you can't do that. Uh, but on the other hand, they might say, yeah, yeah, you can do that. That's fine. So we're always operating uh, within a system of expectations that are provided by our culture. So, so what it means to be free, um, I think, is kind of unclear. The way that I would think about it is that uh, what we humans are doing is we are increasingly saying, look, if cultural expectations don't make sense, then we won't hold people uh, to those expectations. And So we are getting rid of expectations um, that we used to have, and we have examples of that. So that's where I'm having trouble, where this uh, creation or um, development or coming into existence of humans and then of them being free. So, do you have any clarification for that?
Yeah, I would put it like this. So there are by nature things in humans that we are born with certain capabilities, certain things in our minds, um, both, you know, with our bodies and our minds both, um, that nature gives to a human, and they are things that belong to our existence, even right out of the even in the womb as we develop in the womb, um, and even outside the womb. Then there are things that we have that are freely ours, our minds, even the baby's mind, he has that, um, and the the natural right to act as an individual for your own comfort, for your own happiness, even at the infant stage. um, there is that when the baby wants to be held, or the baby wants to be comforted, the baby wants to be fed. The sense perceptions is noticing things, awareness is starting to take place, etc. However, with the human species, we know that our babies, we know through our own experience that our babies come out, they're weak, they're helpless, they need to grow, they need to learn, and they need to learn, they need to know how to learn that freedom that they're naturally given carefully. And that's because they are born free. They need to know how to use it correctly. So, for example, if my son, when he was 2 years old, got curious about the stove, and he was starting to get tall enough to reach up there to put his hand on the stove, I noticed it was red. I just made a pot of tea and the burner was red. And he would start to reach up there. He's freely making a choice out of his curiosity, and then willing, his power to will, to touch it. But then I, as his parent, see that and he's going to hurt himself. That's going to burn him. And I tell him, no, don't. When it's red, it's going to hurt. It's ouch. And I can explain to him that this is hurt by my expressions, by my sharpness, my tone of voice. And then he learns, oh, I had the freedom to make that choice, but yet freedom then has to be carefully made, and has to be made by wise choices. That was going to be a dumb choice. I was going to burn my hand. And so he, on an elementary level, he'll learn that, okay, dad said that's no, don't do that. Then as he gets a little bit older, he'll understand why. He'll understand what burning means. He'll understand, okay, now I see I have choices that I'm free to do, but these choices, though, have to be smart choices, because I can hurt myself with just outright um, uh, doing what I want to do without thinking about it. So now I got to start thinking about what I do. So nature teaches us, even with animals, you see that with certain animal species, the parents feed and take care of their babies for a while, and teach them how to hunt and teach them how to gather and so forth until they can go on their own. Well, humans were the same way. The parents were there to nurture that freedom so that they use it the right way. And the same thing with civil law. Then civil law is um, to help us, because people won't always make the right choices with their freedom. So civil law has to be there so that there can be true freedom, because without law, and people just do what they want to do and hurt each other, well, then there's no longer freedom, because your freedoms are going to be violated instantly by other people. We just act like a bunch of savages that way. So
Okay.
it's, yeah.
Yeah, I got lost somewhat earlier. I didn't want to interrupt, but in using the example that your son was reaching up to the red thing on the stove, you said that he was free to do that.
Mhm.
Okay, so are you making a distinction between um, freedom and just simply behavior or motivation? In other words, whatever your son did, would that be him exercising his freedom, no matter how good or bad it was considered to be by his parent? In which case, uh, you would be equating freedom with behavior, with whatever and with whatever a human uh, did at any moment. Um, uh, in the stove situation, there's an interesting question having to do with child rearing, um, and what you uh, the model that you used in what you described would be what I would refer to as authoritarian. In other words, now I will oversimplify, this does not actually necessarily apply to you, but we could imagine you're saying, no, don't do that. And your son saying, why? And you're saying, because I told you not to. Now, that would be the epitome of authoritarianism. And so, an alternative approach would be uh, uh, the reason that I told you to stop was because I was afraid you would hurt yourself. And it's because the burner is hot, and we can show that. We can put our hands together and slowly bring them closer and closer to the burner, and you'll see what I'm referring to. And actually, it can cause a significant injury that will take a long time to clear up. So I was trying to protect you. Um, Now, if you don't agree with me, if you think that I'm wrong about this, then please let's discuss it. Let's talk about it. Of course, with a very, very young child, that can't really occur. But it's that framework of what the right thing is to do is something that is always up for discussion. But at any rate, uh, it becomes unclear to me what human rights are. Uh, I can I can imagine you could say, well, what I believe in is allowing people to do anything that they want to do as long as it does not negatively impact other people. However, that's a little problematic because uh, somebody else may be negatively impacted by seeing something happen that they don't believe in that others feel like is okay. Um, and so somebody coming out as gay, for instance, uh, might actually cause a lot of suffering within that person's family. And so the question would be, well, then does the person have the freedom to come out as gay, to announce to the world, and that he or she is gay? And um, so to me, the idea of what constitutes a human being's right as a human being is not at all clear, but certainly is not something to be found in the natural world. What we see is cultures in which there's much obedience to the culture, and then within that framework there is a certain amount of freedom to do certain things. And that varies from culture to culture, some cultures being much more restrictive than others. So that's where I have problems with that.
See, I'm I'm opposite. I think if let's use the example of a person who's gay. If they're gay, they should come out, be free to be who they are. If they're not, now you said their family might get hurt about this, but why is their family hurt? Is it because cultural taboos? For example, if they grew up, it was America in the 1960s or something, and they're heavily influenced by religion, a man-made thing, then those taboos that they have um, are actually violating the rights of their gay child, and they're hurting him. And the gay child has to suppress who they really are. Um, and as Carl Jung would say, in the shadows, they're suppressing things, but their persona, it's fake. And a person can't live like that for very long and live a happy life. That has to come out. And that is a right. Now, if you're saying that it's hurting his family's feelings because they have taboos against that, that has nothing to do with the natural rights of humans. Because, for example, let's say um, there is someone who really believes, who's a staunch Roman Catholic, and they believe the Pope is the voice of God on earth. He represents Jesus Christ himself. And when he speaks ex cathedra, that's like Jesus speaking. Okay. And those of us who aren't Catholic may say, well, that's kind of ridiculous. And why would you do that? But beliefs, people's beliefs, that's part of their mind and their intellectual property. Those things are made by archetypes in the person's minds. And it does come from their ancestors, passed down in their culture, etc. But but those belong to that person. And they really believe that. They hold of that and it's part of their life. But as long as they're not violating my rights to not believe it, it's who cares? But but we can still live together in the same society. I don't have to believe, and that person doesn't have to believe or enjoy the same exact things. I don't have to believe in the Pope. I don't have to believe that he's God on earth. Okay. And then that may that may offend Catholics that believe that. In turn, it may offend me because they do believe it, but being offended by disagreeing about an idea is not violating someone's rights. Now, for example, you look at uh, Nazi Germany in the 1930s. They started to burn books anything that opposed Nazi ideology was forbidden in Germany. Well, this started to violate intellectual rights because there were people who wanted to read and discover philosophy and other intellectual writings. And so the Nazis were scared, hey, this is going to expose us if the German people and the German youth get to read these other ideas. So we got to get rid of all these things. Well, that violates the people's rights to choose to discover more knowledge and other things. And so I my understanding is that these rights are natural to us and should not be suppressed, but should not infringe on another person's rights. Now, for example, let's say let's talk about homosexual men and gay marriage. Okay. Now, I may not. It may not be something I would do. Okay, but if two men who are consenting adults wanted to do it between themselves, okay, go ahead, do it. But they can't tell me that I have to like it. That's my right not to like it. It's their right to do it, but I can't hurt them because they want to do that. That's their right. My right is to say, okay, I have the right to disagree that I don't personally like that, and I wouldn't do it. I'd rather be married to a woman. Okay. And then they can't say, well, it's bad for you because we don't like women, that you can't be married to a woman. Instead, we have this diversity of ideas, this diversity of different likes and different beliefs. But then at the same time, because we can't interfere, we can't hinder each other from having those rights, then we can come to a common agreement how to live together. But anytime a culture tries to make everybody one way, it has always turned into disaster because it violates the nature of man. Man is just not, we're not geared that way. And unfortunately, you see that with the popularization today in American politics. The right tries to get everyone to think one way, the left tries to get everyone to think one way, and there's no more the ability to have the freedom of different ideas to talk about them, to share them, to have friendly disagreements, but then live together. And I think, one of our founding fathers, Thomas Paine, in his book, um, Individual Rights, he really lays that out great. That he talks about, from what I was just saying, that from nature, man has these rights. But then at the same time, we know that from evidence of how man lives, that man thrives better when he's with other humans, and he needs other humans. And then, you go into the division of labor and making things, but also to socialization and so forth. And so he would say that the civil rights come from these natural rights. And then the civil rights belong to the man when he becomes part of that society. And then that society comes to an agreement about what natural rights are going to be exchanged for certain civil rights, so that we can have protection and security in the society where people won't hurt each other. So um, so Thomas Paine would say that man doesn't enter into a society to forfeit his rights, his natural rights. What he does is he enters into society, and they agree upon civil rights, but it's for the ability to have their rights secured. So, for example, go back to the idea of gay marriage between two men. Like I said, it's not something I would do personally. But if two men who are consenting adults wanted to do that, that's what they are. They're gay men. That's what they want to do. They love each other. I don't have to like it or agree with it. But at the same time, I am not allowed to do anything with them to stop it or to hurt them because they did that. Um, and this way, then we have a society where we truly are free because I don't have to like it and I'm free to do that. They don't have the right to tell me I don't have to like it, but at the same time, they're free to do it. So we all have our freedom, but the freedoms are secured because they're protected. Now, um, that's why, for example, in totalitarian states, homosexuality has always been against the law. In Iran, they hang homosexuals. The Soviet Union had persecuted homosexuals. Nazi Germany sent them to concentration camps. China, it's illegal. The Middle East and the theocracies, homosexuality is illegal um, and against the law. So um, these men don't have these rights. And we did the same thing to Black people in America, right? Of course, with the slavery, but then even after that, with all the Jim Crow laws and everything they did and segregation, which was a horrible thing. We did not give them the rights of being human beings, and we didn't protect those rights. And so the civil rights movement, especially with Martin Luther King Jr., uh, they were doing the right things to get the Black people their equal rights amongst whites and other races in our country.
Well, I think one thing important to recognize is that with regard to what we should be able to do and should not be able to do, you and I probably are in agreement. That's because I believe you and I have been surrounded by a culture by a culture that believes those things. Now, it could be that at a certain point in your life, you did find that there was another culture that appealed more, and you shifted to that, and that is one that emphasizes more freedom in certain areas or something like that. but but the fact that you and I believe that people should be able to do a particular thing, like enter into homosexual marriage or something like that, does not, in my mind, mean that it is a quote natural right. It's just an agreement that we ought to make it a right for every human being, that we ought to change the culture, uh, uh, the cultures of us humans over the globe in that direction, where uh, people are given more, quote, freedom to do things which don't have a bad effect on other people. So you and I agree, I think, almost entirely with regard to what people should be allowed to do. But that doesn't mean that what people are allowed to do is something that exists in the natural world other than the phenomenon of culture or of us being a social animal where uh, we are observed doing things by others and we get positive and negative reinforcement, and that shapes us so that we are more in conformity to that particular culture. But I don't, the idea that uh, humans came into the world completely free uh, and that was because it was their natural right. That I can't. That doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't seem to correspond to anything that I understand happens.
Yeah, so and just so you know, I'm heavily in my philosophy. I'm heavily influenced by the men of the Enlightenment.
Uh,
That the Renaissance period is my heavy influence, and I think a lot of that is because my formal education was on history of philosophy, and so Aristotle and all the men of the Enlightenment up to our founding fathers, who were the men of the Enlightenment, were my heavily influences. And so I do have to tell you that because of that heavy influence, I think in terms of their teachings as my basis for knowledge a lot on every just about everything. It's kind of like uh, they talk about that your paradigm is kind of like your pair of glasses that you put on and that you see the world through.
uh-huh.
So that is how I see it. That is, I've read other ideas, um, some not as much as others. So I'm not an expert in a lot of other things, but um, so with the men of the Enlightenment, it was what you're saying with the cultures. What they would talk about that as first man is free, there's natural rights, but then when men come together, decide to live together, then a civil society has to be created, and that's where
Yeah. And by the
yeah.
way, if I may interrupt,
Mhm.
um, that seems to be a totally non-realistic picture that humans are born free of all social um, constraints, and then they decide, I think I'll join a group, the infant or the child or whatever says, I'm not going to just stay in the world by myself and see these other people doing stuff, but I'm going to join in and be accepted by them. That doesn't happen. The infant comes out totally immersed in the culture of another human or of humans. And the infant is never born free.
Right,
Uh,
right. Like I understand what you're saying, and that is because we are now. If you look at us, we have a lot more formed countries, civilizations now more than ever. But that's not how it was all the time. But also too, we think about this: totalitarian states and slavery were inventions by men, by societies, as they grew, and they were ideas that societies decided to do. Now, so for example, a child born into Soviet Russia, let's say during the time of the Soviet Union, okay, and at the same time, a child born in the United States at the very same time, very same year, naturally, as humans, those two children have a lot of freedoms that belong to them by nature. Okay, this is the key, by nature. Yet, the cultures that they're born into will not allow those freedoms to thrive. The one born in the United States will have more opportunity to have his freedoms that he's naturally born to thrive. The child born in the Soviet Union will have more of his natural freedoms stifled right from the beginning because he's born into that. So the culture that someone's born into, you can't help. But that still doesn't deny the natural uh, the natural rights and the nature of man that he's born with. Um, and unfortunately, let's say someone's born in North Korea. They live in a terrible situation, terrible government, and they're born into that. And of course, they're instantaneously, like right away, their culture is going to affect those natural freedoms that they're born with. And they're going to be changed, they're going to be stifled. And so, versus a child born in Australia where they have a lot of freedoms, that child from the beginning is going to be able to exercise freedom. He's going to learn freedom from his parents. He's going to know uh, what he can do and things he can start dreaming about what he could be, creativeness, doing things. For a child in North Korea, he's not going to be able to have that. It's going to be stifled right from the get go. So,
But the there's an issue that uh, is getting a little bit lost. What I am hearing you say, the picture that you describe, that I get when I hear what you say, seems totally unrealistic. The idea that when a human is born, that human is totally free, has natural rights, and then can decide, I will join a group. But in point of fact, the infant is born into the group.
I
That
said that. Didn't I say that? So, for example, let's say the child's born in the Soviet Union. He doesn't have a choice. He's born into that. And that culture will stifle his freedoms right away. But a child who's born into a more free country, he's going to be able to express those freedoms. Now take the United States, for example, right? We were a colony. Okay, you know the history. We were a colony, and a British colony, and we rebelled. And at that point in time, the colonists were going to form a new country. Okay, now the forming of new countries don't happen all the time in our modern era, but it did back then. And so our founding fathers, who are men of the Enlightenment, said, listen, there are uh, self evident rights of humans that are self evident from nature.
See, and
And
that part right there is something that I cannot grasp. Excuse me.
so, of course, they would say, they're unalienable rights. And of course, you know what that means, that these are rights that a person is born with that cannot be taken away or given away by the person who has them unless they voluntarily do that. And those three that those men thought and believed were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's the foundation of our country. And so when they formed the United States was built upon those teachings of the Enlightenment. So um, now countries can change. You look at England, they were a very strict monarchy for a long time until the Enlightenment came. And of course, they still have a queen and they have a king, but the parliament took over and the prime minister, and they changed how the form of government they used because of the great works of men like John Locke and Adam Smith and so forth, and Isaac Newton, who showed them that that humans thrive when they're more free rather than under uh, a despot or any kind of totalitarian state. And so England has done it. England's always been a free country and a great thriving country since then. Um,
And
so
I don't disagree uh, with most of that. It's the initial topic that we were talking about was the issue of whether of what is the concept of quote natural rights, and how does it come into existence? and uh, and I cannot see uh, a a way of speaking as you do about that, namely that we are born completely free, and then we uh, decide to join a group, and then we there's the interaction between self and the rest of the group, such that I limit my freedoms to do those things that might be harmful to others, and so on. I mean, I understand that principle, but your description of how it emerges on planet Earth, I cannot follow that. And so I think we um, we use the word natural rights probably because the natural sciences have been so successful and and have enabled us to do so many things and so forth. So the natural sciences uh, have a good name, and natural means referring to nature. And of course, what the natural sciences deal with is um, a model of how things work that includes uh, ultimately things like particle like objects and wave like objects that interact in certain ways such that mathematical equations can be devised that allow us to predict what measurements will turn out to be, stuff like that. Um, so I think a lot of times we take our currently held beliefs and try to legitimize them by assigning words um, that seem to make it a part of the natural sciences. We use terms like energy and quantum and so forth. And people who have no concept at all of quantum mechanics will legitimize their beliefs that they're advocating for by introducing terms like that. And almost nobody else can understand that either, so it just goes unchallenged. But so uh, I think that, we use the term rights or right, uh, a right, in ways that we understand. But as far as our legitimization of those, our discussion of why it is true that I or you or someone has a particular right, it is poorly understood, and and I think in objectivism, like you were saying, that objectivism starts just with certain basic things that don't have to do with other species. Like we're dealing with humans here, and so that cuts off a fair amount of understanding that people have. Um, but so the distinction here is between uh, that which exists according to the laws of nature or something like that, and that which exists by agreement, like within a culture, um, and also how that agreement is established. Um, the authoritarian approach is uh, Well, you'll just have to learn that if I say it, it's so. Um, and then there are non-authoritarian approaches. But so the this whole thing of natural rights is, um, as I say, I think is problematic, and I cannot follow your, I cannot go along with some of the things that you say pretty close to the beginning, even though I think I agree with you about what should and should not be done, the ethics, ethical principles. Um, and I do believe that people should be free to do uh, that which is harmless to others, and well, I would say unto self. If you say, well, I'm not harming others uh, by doing this, uh, just harming myself, I'm not sure whether you should say that I have the right to do that. Uh, I would say I should not do that if indeed my ultimate ethical principle says that I want the good life for everyone, which would include self as well as others.
Yeah, my personal belief on that, I know it's controversial, but now this is my personal belief on that.
Uh-huh.
I personally believe that people should work out any mental issues they have and get help through therapy or medication, but that that people should try to find a meaning in life and pursue that. However, let's say a person has a terrible incurable cancer, and the medication, the doctor says, listen, if I give you this chemotherapy, you're going to be wishing you were dead. And there's there's like a 10% chance you're going to live, maybe, but it's going to be horrible. And the person says, I've done what I could in this life. I have good loved ones. I don't want to suffer like this. And they decide to take their life because they can't live a full life.
Mm-hmm.
I personally believe they should be able to take it
Mm-hmm.
because that's their decision. I don't believe in making humans suffer unnecessarily if they don't want to. I know that's controversial. People will probably hate me for saying that, but um, I think that's a personal choice.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
agree with you.
yeah. So um, now, what
However,
I've yeah,
however, there's a tricky issue here because um, it involves the person making a prediction as to how things are going to be, and that prediction being that it's going to be uh, increasingly intolerable when there can be the possibility of turning things around such that later the person would say, well, I'm glad I did not take my life. So that kind
oh
of complicates issues, and that's why uh, the idea of assisted suicide requires consultation, with and thorough assessment of the person's actual situation.
yeah, a lot of times it's actually from what I've read is the person's already suffering. They're already in the pain,
Mhm.
and they've tried. Let's say they tried a little bit of chemo, and it's just not. And the doctor says this doesn't look good. It's going to get worse, and they're already suffering in terrible pain. A lot of times at that point, I agree. If they want to, then they're already suffering. But another example is you look at in World War II when the Japanese were attacking Singapore. The Australian soldiers who were fighting in Malaysia trying to slow them down, um, they found out that if you surrendered to the Japanese, the Japanese would keep you alive if you were wounded, and they would bayonet you to death, or they would light you on fire while you're still alive, and it would be a horrible death, and it was happening. So during the fighting, if an Australian soldier got wounded really bad, he would ask another Australian soldier just to shoot him in the head and kill him, because they had to retreat so fast that they were going to leave the wounded behind, and the wounded were just going to be tortured even more. And so the Australian soldiers said, "Don't let me go through the torture. Just I'm going to die. I'd rather die quickly than die now." So the Australian soldiers were killing their comrades, but it was to spare them from a terrible torment that they were going to face. So personally, for me, I actually think that's ethical, and I may be in a minority saying that, but in those kind of situations that humans are faced in, I think it's right if the person wants that, rather than face even a worse torment.
Yeah, I don't have any difficulty with that. Again, on the other side, the concern has to do with the perspective of the person at that point in time and whether that is predictably not going to change. And we have examples of people developing severe depression, and from their standpoint, their life is gone and they take their life. But if they're treated, the depression can be turned around and the person can say, "Gosh, I'm glad I did not kill myself." So there are complicated issues involved.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, yeah, that is true. Um, Now, what I've given you so far is the empiricist enlightenment understanding of natural rights. So now I'm going to give you the objectivist.
Yeah, wait, now, uh, when you introduce terms like that, there are problems. Like, I don't really know what you're referring to, and somebody listening to this has not necessarily studied philosophy and history and so forth. And uh, so instead of a label for the position, if you can state what the position is, uh, and then say where the objectivist position is different. But the position, by that I mean uh, one or more statements that reflect a belief that is held. Objectivists believe that. I believe that. Uh, the uh, philosophers from the Enlightenment believe that, or believed that.
Mhm. Okay, so the philosophers of enlightenment, who are the empiricist, they believed that truth was what could be observed through nature, through and that include the human species, our nature, and then it had to be validated, and then using logic and reason through that validation, they would find the truth of things. And so, if something could not be observed or validated, they would say, well, that's up for question and not for sure. They said that we wouldn't deny it, but they would say, but we can't rely on that as a for sure thing. So um, that's what their philosophy was. Now, objectivism then doesn't totally agree with the empiricists on this. Uh, Partially, they would, but in the objectivist viewpoint is to look at uh, the universe and the world and the human species objectively, to to look at everything. And one of the biggest things in objectivism is if something contradicts something, that it's not true. Okay, that's what they believe. So they would have to work out all contradictions, get rid of all contradictions, and then find the objective truth of something. So when it comes to natural rights, an objectivist would not necessarily use that term natural rights. An objectivist would use the term moral rights. That um, basically they would use moral rights to state that um, it would mean to use what nature has given a man to pursue life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Um, and the one fundamental right that the objectivist believes in is man's own life. Man's own life is the ultimate moral principle. And that means um, man's life is sacred, it is sovereign.
Can I back
Yeah,
up for a minute?
sure.
Um, you said that you referred to something as a principle. Now, a principle, as I understand it, is a belief that is held maybe axiomatically. That belief then is modeled with words. And in order to model a belief with words, it has to be a sentence. And so just giving one or two words, that cannot be um, a principle. Now, if that one or two words means to the other person a particular sentence, then yeah, one could do that. Um, uh, you're introducing the word moral, which is good. Um, and I'm not sure whether you and I have exactly the same terminology. Um, I would consider that moral and ethical are essentially the same, although they can be used in some cases, can be defined as being somewhat different. But in general, they they mean the same thing. And so I see our beliefs as being either ethical or moral or existential. And existential beliefs are just beliefs about what exists or has existed or might exist and how it all works. Like, I believe it's going to rain. That's different than I believe I should do such and such. And philosophers, as I'm sure you probably know, have made a distinction between those two sets of beliefs, referring to the is and ought. And there have been indeed some efforts to try to make them all be under the same category. But I don't believe that's been successful. And it is very, very useful to consider our beliefs to be either existential or ethical. Um, Existential would have to do with, well, what's going to happen if I do this, that, or the other? Ethical would be, well, should I do it or not? And so we base our ethical beliefs upon many of our existential beliefs. Um, but ultimately, it comes down to uh, why do we actually believe that we should do such and such. And that opens up a whole area, like whether there is, like natural rights, whether there is natural ethics. And some people have claimed that. Uh, Many atheists have, because when you take a God out of the picture, uh, then because what one should or should not do has been considered to be obedience to whatever God wants, then that legitimization of ethical beliefs disappears. And so some atheists have said, yeah, but the natural universe uh, has ethics in it. Uh, but I don't believe that they've demonstrated that. So that's kind of a side issue here. But um,
I
now,
see what you're I see what you're saying. It's really it. I've spent a lot of years thinking about that very topic. So I I personally don't believe, my personal belief is I don't believe that there is uh, I might not deny a divine architect, but I don't believe in man-made religions that I believe are all man-made to tell us how we have to live. Instead, I believe that, um, and again, I can't believe it. I can only go by observation, but that humans, and I can only look at introspection in my own mind, that humans do have in them the ability to sympathize, empathize, to love, to want justice, to not see others hurt, to the point where I believe that when we talk about the ought, okay, man can just go existential and say, okay, if I do this, it's going to hurt me, so I'm not going to do it. And a lot of people live their lives that way. But there are others who say, maybe I should give money to the poor who are living in the streets. Maybe I should try to help them. And that is what I call virtue. When the person decides to do that by their own choice. So I believe you can have virtue as we understand what virtue is as humans without having a God telling us what virtue is. I believe there's been a lot of virtuous people who were non-religious and maybe who were atheistic. And so I think that um, any idea that a human has to believe in God to be virtuous, I just don't find that in nature. I don't believe that's the way it works.
well, I agree with you on that. I am non-theistic. I don't believe I'm being watched by an entity that is pulling strings for me, if or arranging for bad things to happen, depending upon his or her mood, and so on. I don't believe any of that. Um, um, so, well, let's see. I think there was another thing I was going to respond to, but it slipped my mind right now. Go ahead and.
Yeah. So one of the things that I have a strong interest in that I've been researching recently and reading a lot of is in the neurosciences. Um, Neuroscience started with Sigmund Freud and then Adler and Carl Jung and so forth, and then now it's moved on to more modern times. Is a fascination about how our mind and our consciousness and our subconsciousness and dreams and all these things work. Um, See, for a long time, Christians in the Western Christianity had always believed that the reason why you dream or the reason why you uh, believe in something or feel about something is because of God. God put that in you. But the neuroscience scientists have discovered that that's not the case. That man is born with natural these natural things in our minds, um, that are there and they've been studied and observed. And um, I find it fascinating, especially Carl Jung. He is just the books I'm reading of his works. It's uh, it's incredibly enlightening, to see how our mind works and how we think about things and what causes us anguish, what makes us think about right things and so forth. What do you think about the neurosciences?
Yeah, the I guess my ideas are best presented in my book on the mind-body problem. And you were going to be reading one chapter a week. I gather that it kind of got set aside, um, and but the 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 question, um, well, there's more than one question. Um, People, have died clinically and have seemed to have experience beyond that, even though their heart was not pumping blood to the brain and so on. And so it turns out that just because this blood supply to the brain is cut off, and the uh, many aspects of the functioning of the brain are made impossible, still it seems like there is activity that goes on for quite a while. Now, presumably, well, one position that people have is that, well, it goes on uh, forever, or at least beyond the time when all of the cells in the brain are dead. And the other position is that, well, consciousness is, quote, correlated with the activity of certain cells in the brain. So as long as those cells are operating, even if they're doing it in small groups, um, the, a consciousness will persist. Now, um, that's one part, the question about whether consciousness persists or not. But it gets more complex than that, because consciousness itself has never been observed, and it is a term that is used even though in the natural sciences there is no um, consideration given for the mind or the contents of the mind. The natural laws of the universe, as described ultimately um, in mathematical equations that have variables that are measurements of one sort or another, have no variables in them having to do with um, conscientiousness or grief or joy or any of those things, and nothing that has to do with the mind itself. So the mind, the concept of the mind, is a supernatural concept. And some people say, oh, well, no, it is still a part of the natural sciences. It's just that we haven't gotten that far yet. Well, one could say exactly the same thing, exactly about God, that God can be shown to exist in the natural sciences, except that it hasn't been done so far. Well, the same is true of the mind. So, when we uh, but we talk about consciousness as if we are fully knowledgeable and understanding of what we're talking about, and consciousness appears to be primarily, if only, the contents of our um, our experience. In other words, whatever we're experiencing, feelings, thoughts, um, perceptions of various sorts, um, hunger, thirst, and so on. So, what we do is we make up a container for those items, and um, and we call that container the mind. And then we make the assumption that there are other such containers, and that they are floating around somewhere in the universe, or are connected to certain things that the physical world acknowledges exist, like human beings and brains and so forth. But how all of that came to be, there's no agreement on, and so it's part of the mind-body problem. The mind-body problem book is free on the website humanianity.com. I always like to plug it, for people that might become interested.
Okay, well, yeah, that's interesting. So I was thinking, so I kind of told you my view of that I believe that humans are born with natural rights. Uh, if you have an opposite view or a different view, what is your view on how man comes into the world?
Well, my view is that man develops in the uterus and pops out at birth, and is cared for by the culture around him or her, uh, the culture initially being mother, or perhaps other people too, and that interaction with this higher power is what forms the basic ethical uh, framework or philosophy for that infant, even though it's not put into words. But more and more, the infant learns to do certain things that bring about some kind of positive reaction, and to avoid doing things that have a negative uh, uh, effect, bring about a negative reaction on the part of this interpersonal culture, mother, parents, family, and so on, and that's a process that just continues um, right on through to the end of life, when one is having to adhere to uh, the culture of the nursing home, let's say, um, and because we are a social animal, and so um, and we are born with, as you say, certain things inside of us, the capacity for empathy and uh, mutual grooming and attachment and things of that sort. But also born within us is a natural tendency to fight, to struggle for dominance, and that's one of our strongest and most negative features, because struggles for dominance cause all kinds of pain, suffering, disability, and early death. They occur at all levels between parent and small child, within the family, within groups, peer groups, within employment situations, in marriages, and other relationships with significant others, and uh, continuing through the manifestation of this tendency by our tribes, that one tribe has reduced empathy for another tribe and can very easily uh, get the urge to maybe exterminate the other tribe. And chimpanzees do that. They'll sneak up on a neighboring tribe and kill its members off and so on.
Well, do you think that? No, and I agree with you. We've seen throughout history of that taking place, where certain kings or leaders of countries going to war for different reasons, and destroying a lot of humanity by trying to do that. So, do you think that urge for dominance is a natural thing or a cultural thing?
Uh, I believe it is uh, natural, meaning that it is a part of our genes. However, like any characteristic, there's variability. So some individuals are going to be strongly oriented in that direction, and others are going to be only weakly oriented, such that they will tend automatically to be followers and accept a position of submission. So, and then, but but these things are modifiable by the culture. So it's not just that that's our fate. We're born that way, and that's all we can do. We can't do anything about it. No, we can develop our ethics and our basic ethical philosophy that is uh, what holds us together as humans, and it's expressed in different ways. Like it's not at all unusual to uh, have people refer to the importance of loving. That's a very, very popular notion. But what does it mean? I think that what it means is avoiding fighting. It's avoiding anger and hostile behavior and struggling for dominance. And the um, impression that we have, which is probably correct, is that the more we have positive, affectionate feelings for a person, the less likely we are to engage in the struggle for dominance. However, for many people, uh, it's going to happen anyway. And so what happens is uh, it leads to relationship breakdown. And relationship breakdown is true at all levels of our social existence, between parent and child, between significant others, between groups, between employers and employees, and between nations. Um, we are precariously dealing with being in a state of struggling for dominance and trying to not let it get so far that it leads to horrible things, which, however, it does very, very, very frequently. And so that's why I think that the development uh, of a basic ethical philosophy for our species, which does not exist currently, is an important thing to work toward. And actually, just today, uh, I uploaded changes to the website having to do with the belief manual. And I don't know whether you have ever explored the belief manual, um, the Humanian belief manual.
Yeah, I
Uh,
looked at it. I looked into it, but didn't do anything with it though.
yeah, well, the big change that I've made is that I have that you immediately come up with free tutorials, and that explains everything and explains what all the complicated things that you can do that uh, that are in the service of working on your own ethics and working on uh, doing your part to make our species come together uh, with a similar uh, um, beliefs, basic ethical philosophy,
Hmm.
essentially. And so it is still just a newborn. It's been there for quite a while, but uh, because people haven't known how to use it and have not been impressed with the idea of um, that we humans can be so much better than we have ever been so far. Uh, People have not, spent a lot of effort in using it, but it's something that allows you to uh, place your beliefs uh, in it and to compare your beliefs with those with others. A voting thing. In other words, every belief that's in there can be voted on by anybody who is registered, signed in. And so then you can see how many people agree and disagree, and you can make contact with other individuals who don't agree or something like that, and go to the forum and discuss um, issues in greater depth. In doing so in writing, uh, it can often make things clearer because you can uh, really see what is being proposed and not have it recede into the past and be covered over by the other stuff that's already in one's mind
Hmm.
and so on. So anyway, that's another plug.
No, that's really interesting. I like the forum idea because the exchange of ideas in writing, I think when you write, you have more time to think about what you're going to say.
yes,
And so then but then you can always go back and change it and say, okay, that wasn't quite right. I should have said this instead.
yeah,
And then the other person can actually read it, think about, take more time to think about it. So I think that's a great idea. I'm going to take advantage of that because I did see the tutorial videos. Um, so
you
def
say you did see them?
yeah, I saw the videos.
Oh, then that was
Yeah,
just today.
yeah, I looked at them today, earlier
Yeah,
today. Yeah, I
today was
saw them. I
when
saw
I
them
put
uploaded.
up there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I have a pretty busy daily schedule. So trying to balance life and family and everything, and so
Yeah,
definitely, I'll look into that because I'm more of a writer when it comes to sharing ideas
uh-huh.
more than right off the top of my head, and I think that's kind of my personality. I've
Uh,
always been that way. So sometimes someone may ask me something and I don't, I'm thinking about it. I don't have like a
Right.
quick answer all the time. But then if I can write about it, I tend to write better than just saying stuff.
Yes. I
Yeah.
think the same is true of myself. Um, and with my mild cognitive impairment, it takes a longer time for me to come up with a word. And but if I'm writing, I can wait and have it come up. But um, when I'm talking, then there's a lot of hesitation that in part, is due to that sort of thing. So,
Yeah. I have a question for you though.
yes.
We're talking about, okay, so if we can change our cultures,
Uh-huh.
then we can actually build a better ethic. So let me ask you this. America would be a great example. America, we have been traditionally, not from the original founding of our country, but over time, uh, Western Christianity with Protestantism and Roman Catholicism has heavily influenced our culture for the longest time. Um, and I personally believe that a lot of those religious teachings that have become cultural in America are actually harmful. Um, um, how, I don't know if you agree with that or not, but how could a culture change from being bound by religious teachings of a man-made religion to more of a natural ethical culture?
Yeah, there's so much in what you said there that is important. Uh, and my position would be perhaps somewhat um, surprising. So, in the first place, I am, as I said, non theistic. I do not have the belief that I'm being watched and that there's an entity out there that's, uh, pulling the strings and so on. However, I consider myself to be religious. Now, for most people, that would mean that I believe in God and supernatural things, and of course I do. I believe in, operate according to some supernatural beliefs like the mind, consciousness, and so on. But leaving that aside, the question is whether religion is, quote, good or bad. And um, uh, and by religion, I should go back to say that I consider that religion is our adult effort as groups to study how to lead a good and happy life. Good meaning uh, what we should and should not do in behalf of others and the environment, and happy what we should and should not do in with regard to the maintenance of our own and improvement of our own happiness or quality of life. So, in other words, uh, every culture has had some sort of way of working on ethics beyond just the time of being a child who is being taught to a greater or lesser extent some things by a parent. So when people become adults, uh, there's a certain amount of, I want to uh, find out more about how to live my life. Now, a lot, our religions are uh, sort of ancient entities, most of them. And so they came about at a time when our worldviews were substantially different. And so many of the religions indeed are theistic. And also, built into the religions are the, the, uh, the same things that are built into us. In other words, we create our religions, our ways of studying together, and so forth. And so when we do that, our tribalism uh, gets in there, and a manifestation of it is, well, in order to be one of us, you have to believe the following sentences, and so on. And of course, that is unfortunate. That means that the religion tends to remain stuck in the past. However, that is not the picture, because all around our religions are changing. And the there are many atheists who are in religious organizations and accepted by the organization. So uh, the what needs to happen is our religions need to change and grow. And you may or may not have run across at the website humanianity.com a metaphor showing a conically shaped mountain with worm-like creatures crawling up seemingly the side of the mountain and at different levels. And but what they're actually doing, not crawling, they're growing at the front end and atrophying at the back end. So our religions are increasingly kind of letting go of some of the bad stuff and are becoming more progressive uh, and expansive as they move toward the top. And as they do so, they will automatically be coming together more and more. So I describe the growth process that's occurring in all of these worms. I label that as humanianity. And then when they finally, theoretically, uh, ideally, all meet at the top and have the same basic non authoritarian ethics,
Hmm.
then humanity will be the religion for humanity. But right now, that's just an ideal. And uh, so, um, so I think that I'm not sure whether I covered your question completely.
No, I think well, I think you did, but at the same, what I was getting at, that if, let's say, we got rid of the man-made religions that we know, like in America, like Mormonism and Protestantism and Roman Catholicism, that I believe that as humans, the way we're made, we could create a better ethic that would be there'll be a true ethic, not a like a Spanish Inquisition thing that was not ethics, uh, but more of a positive way of living for all humans, where humans could be diverse in what they believe and think, but not having a man-made religion interfering and and influencing the ethics by what they believe God told them.
But do
Right?
you understand that you're describing that as being replaced by another man-made religion?
Hmm.
There's talking about humans making it, humans creating it. What you're really talking about is your view, I think, of religion is primarily associated with Christian fundamentalist approaches that many of us no longer can accept. But on the other hand, well, some aspects of those religions we cannot accept, and so. Um, but that doesn't mean that there aren't the positive things, usually that have to do with loving your enemy, loving your neighbor, uh, doing what you can to make the world a better place, and so forth. And some of the religions are non theistic even to begin with, but they're all man made, all of them. And so if you're saying, well, maybe we can get rid of the man made religions and make a new religion, that's still man made.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. But maybe getting out of the taking away the God judgment aspect of it.
Well, yes, and that God judgment aspect, I think, is an interesting phenomenon. We can ask, well, why is it there? And what I think is that um, for many of us, there is a natural longing for the experience that we had when we were newborn and taken care of by an all powerful entity that made us feel so good at times and so on. And then that entity, when we began to express our freedom, so to speak, more because we had more capability, we were able to walk and run and throw things and so on. The entity also had some negative reactions to those things, but from very early in life, there was this all important other, which may have been a combination of mother and father, um, and maybe even some older siblings and so on. So we may have a deep yearning for that inside. And so naturally, to develop the world view that, well, I am conscious now and trapped kind of in this um, uh, human world of some joy, contentment, and appreciation, but a whole lot of pain, suffering, disability, and early death. When I die, I will return to this all powerful, loving creature that I somehow walked away from, uh, causing things like the Garden of Eden story and so forth, um, where everything is great and then humans express some of their freedom to do things that this entity didn't want. And so that messed up everything. But at any rate, uh, that's kind of what I'm uh, seeing about religion, that religion has good and bad in it. And some religions have more of the old stuff in it, um, and some do not. And that there is movement going on. So taking a cross section right now, you see a whole bunch of stuff that does not look very favorable about religion, and it's easy to see that stuff because of our reaction to it, and not so easy to see the good stuff that is also going on in the religions.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson, one of the unique books that I actually I read quite often is just for a daily meditation is his book on the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. So Thomas Jefferson, who was a deist, believed that Jesus was a great philosopher who tapped into what nature teaches us on how to live together better. And so he went through the New Testament, the Gospels, and he saw the things that were philosophical, and he kept those. But then anything that started to teach more established church ideas, he removed because he saw that was something man just put in to try to get uh, a way to have authority over other men.
I
So
see. I had probably a false recollection of what he did. I thought he just took out the parts where Jesus actually said things, and but all the other stuff he removed.
yeah,
Maybe
he
that's not correct.
yeah he kept all the teachings that
Yeah.
Jesus put in, but he got rid of all the things he believed that people who started to organize a church put in there
Mhm.
so they could have authority over other humans. So he believed that those were things that Jesus did not teach. That other men put those things in there to create an established, organized church, um, to get people to follow that, rather than just following the regular teachings of Jesus. And so, like you said, I think what he did is he took the good things
Yes.
of Jesus on how to live, like you said, do unto others as if others do unto you, etc.
Uh-huh.
But he got rid of all the stuff that I think we would both agree are the bad parts of, let's say, Roman Catholicism or something that has hurt mankind over time.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, so no, I I agree with you that if when I look at Jesus as a philosopher who taught really good things, um, then I say yes. But but outside of that, what other people brought in, I don't agree with. Well, that's a good discussion. So what's a topic you think we should talk about next time that we can think about?
Well, I don't know. I feel pretty much open to stuff. Going back to your original presentation of objectivism, uh, three foundational principles: existence, um, um, consciousness, and identity. I think were the three.
Mm-hmm.
And fleshing in those and seeing where they hold up and where they don't, presumably, or at least in my mind, or that of some others, and so on. But I think we could uh, kind of make that decision next time, depending upon what's happened between now and then. So I think we had a good discussion, and do you have any final thoughts?
No, I think what we talked about I thought it was quite interesting. Our starting points on natural rights, our beginning, how we think it happens, was different.
Uh-huh.
But it was quite interesting that when we came into the cultural, societal aspect,
Uh-huh.
that it was the same.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. And I don't have a problem with that because I think then is in my understanding of things, that I think the most important thing is how humans live together today
Yeah,
and in the future. And so we may have disagreements about origins and how we got here, but I think the important thing is that we can decide, we can agree on what is the best way for man to live now
yes,
that's going to be the best for all of us, rather than um, because I'm like you said, I'm totally against totalitarianism.
yeah,
I'm anti-war. Basically, I'm against anything that hurts humanity.
mhm,
Whether it could even be ignorance in science,
mhm,
where science is withheld with helping, like medical science. For a long time, man was held under superstition all the way through the medieval times,
yeah.
and people died because of it.
Science has to do with existential beliefs. Religion has to do with ethical beliefs. And the two are very much intertwined and important, I would say. Well, okay. So shall we call it tonight?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And yeah, it was really good. I appreciate it, Bill.
I appreciate it too. Really, really am grateful to you for having these discussions. Bye bye.
All right.
Humanity. Now we all can see humanity. How much better